again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, a good technology, whether it's hardware or software, a good technology solves the why.
For new listeners to our podcast, John DiMaria here, one of our customer success managers on the team, together with Brian Gray. And Brian is working at St. Stephen's Episcopal School. And Brian, I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself because everybody's, curious about what you do and how you do it. And we're going to be talking about technology throughout the entirety of this session. So this is going to be a blast. I'm super excited.
Well, I work, as John said, I work at St. Stephen's Episcopal School. We're in Austin, Texas. We have 700 students in grades 6 through 12. About 170 of them live on campus that you can see in the background behind me. We have 200 in our middle school and about 500 in our upper school. My job now is strictly within the technology office. I do database management for the school information system and learning management system and Google accounts and accounts on other systems and bringing new people in and that sort of thing. But I also do work with teachers on to help them find the technology solutions that they're looking for, even if they're not really quite sure what it is they're looking for.
That's it. It's interesting when you say that. It feels like you're a jack of all trades, in that you do a little bit of the technical side of things, but then you're also acting kind of as an advisor and guide along the way.
Yeah, that's certainly a lot of it. The database stuff is, keeping the trains running on time, making sure the data is there and the accounts are there and things are working. But a lot of it is consulting with teachers in helping them figure out how to use the tools that we have, and when we need to, how to, go out and look for something else.
Mm, mm. That's really interesting in that. I think that particular aspect of things is a struggle for most schools. I wouldn't say it's like the easiest thing, and I mean from experience, and probably you can also. I mean, I'm interested in your perception on it. Just the nature of choosing academic technologies. Uh, it it felt like when I was working with that, it was very, very hard to ensure that all teachers got exactly what they need, or like all teachers were working with the tools that they wanted in their classrooms, that sort of like teacher autonomy thing. Are you finding that like, how is that at, in your day to day?
Well, we have a relatively large faculty for
Mm,
the number of students we have, because that's the kind of school we are. So we have a lot of different teachers with lots of different needs in their discipline, different personal tastes about how much technology they want to use or need to use. There's certain base level stuff that everyone's got to be able to do just to get through the day and the academic year.
yeah.
But beyond that, teachers have different ideas about what's good and what's not good, what's worth their time and what's not worth their time. Uh, and it can be certainly can be tricky to find the right thing. My experience is the hardest part of it is getting the teacher to tell me what they actually want and what they actually need, as opposed to them telling me the solution they've dreamed up in their head about how to go about doing this.
Mm,
A lot of times I get a question of, do we have this, that, or the other thing?
mhm,
And well, no, because this, that, or the other thing doesn't actually exist. But what is it you wanted to do with it? And let's start there. So
mm.
I find a lot of times starting the discussion 3 or 4 or 5 steps backwards from where the teacher wanted to start it.
Huh.
Uh,
'Cause
and
oh, go ahead.
and then the other piece of that is uh, other other teachers see what a teacher is doing and how they're doing it, and they may be interested. There's sometimes the pressure on one teacher comes from the students who are in some other teacher's class, and hey, we're doing this cool thing over there. Can't we do that here too? And in other cases, circumstances just force us all into learning a lot more technology than we wanted to in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah, yeah. It,
And
I'm just thinking like if we kind of go back and tease out this like you talked about that teachers come to you, and because I think this is something that's interesting in that I mean, like the classroom educator, they are encountering situations that they're trying to probably solve, or that they, you know, have a vision of like how it's supposed to look. And when they come to you, I mean, and they say, I need this particular tool, and you're like, well, we don't have that. But and you said like, you know, we need to think like 5 steps, you know, either forward or backward, or you know, like basically reverse engineering, you know, what they're after. I mean, is it a is it a tricky process? I mean, is that like how do you handle those kinds of meetings, or where do you encounter that in your day to day? Is it that the teacher comes to you, or is it that you're out, you know, searching them for them, or I'm just very curious about like that
yeah,
how that social scenario looks.
in my case,
Yeah.
uh, it is almost always that the teacher comes to me and says, "Hey, can we do this?" or
Yeah.
"What about this?" And that's mostly a function of the other aspects of my job. Uh, you know, the database management, the account management stuff
Mm,
keeps me in my office and at my desk a good bit of the day.
mm,
I don't get to go wander through classrooms. Someone
mm,
else in
mm.
our technology office does exactly that, but that's not my part of it.
No. No.
Um, so the other folks in our technology office are also uh, working with teachers, looking at what's going on, looking for solutions to the questions and the problems that the teachers have. My role in it tends to be toward the finding the systemic tools these days,
Mm,
you know,
mm.
something that we're going to use with every teacher in a department.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so it, for the most part, it's a teacher coming to me and say, "Hey, look, we've got this problem," or more frequently, it's, "Hey, look, can we get this?"
mm,
And that's when I start backing up through, well, okay, so what are you going to do with that?
yeah.
And why do you want to do that? And what problem, what it really
Yeah.
boils down to, eventually we get to, what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
And in some cases, we wind up right back where they started from.
Mm,
But even if they've got exactly the tool that they need, I need to understand more about the situation. I need to understand more about what they're trying to accomplish to be able to help them implement it.
mm.
Not just to be sure that we're getting the right tool, but understanding what it is they're trying to do so that I know how we're going to have to implement it, how we're going to have to work with the teachers and the students to make it work.
Right. Right. Because it's interesting in that what you're talking about, and I think maybe this is where we're heading, or at least I'm thinking, at least where I'm very interested in is that you're talking about like, you know, you have this database knowledge, and sort of the more technical aspect of the different systems that maybe you have access to, or that teachers are going to have access to, and there I can think that your competency your knowledge and skills and abilities really play that role, because maybe we have this fantastic tool, but it's not going to play nice with the database or the system that's sitting there. And that's when that teacher needs that advice, or at least a hey, wait a minute, there's slow down. I see where you're going, but we need to think, how is this going to be an effective solution or a simple solution for our students, or for you as the teacher in the classroom, so that it becomes manageable. Because I can also think that there are some systems that they have a lot of promise, but they can be a nightmare to implement into a school system, into a school or an organization, without really understanding what are the ramifications of this implementation. Have you experienced something like that before, or is it?
Well, yeah, one of the factors that we evaluate when we're
Mm,
looking at hardware or software
mhm,
is, what is the likely scale that we need right now, and what happens if that scales up to the entire school? If a particular product works great for a group of 15 or 20 students in a classroom with one teacher, that's fine
oh,
until every English teacher wants to use it with every student in the school.
yeah.
If in fact it just doesn't scale to that level, and that it could be that it doesn't scale because of constraints on the software, it just can't handle that many people,
Mm,
or it might be that it doesn't scale because it's difficult to manage
mm,
accounts
mm,
for a large number of people, or it doesn't scale because the cost is way too high.
yeah. Yeah.
um, if it's one thing for us to support $50 per user if we've got 15 or 20 users. It's quite another when we've got
Yeah.
that amount at 700
Yeah.
users. Um, so we're looking at all of those different aspects. The what does it do part, and does it serve it the purpose we need it to serve? How easy is it for students and teachers to get started with?
Mm,
And how long does it take them to become reasonably effective at using it?
mm,
But
yeah.
also, how much does it cost? How much time is it going to take to manage?
Right. Because I mean, and I don't mean, what I'm thinking about here is, I mean, really what you're talking about is the vetting process. And I've I've been active now in a couple of discussion posts in Atlas, trying to, I mean, just give people my experience from working within, working as an IT director and working as a principal and school teacher. But what you're describing, I mean, it's essentially how do you decide whether you're going to buy in, or whether you're going to work with a vendor, whether you're going to work with an academic technology or not. You're talking about the cost. You're talking about not just like the monetary cost, but also the human resources aspect of things. You're talking about whether it's going to play nice in your digital ecosystem, if you're going to be, implementing on like a large scale versus a small scale. I mean, this is fantastic stuff. Do you have like, so in all of this, and I'm guessing that there's some sort of like routine or structure, like when you're going through this, when a teacher says, I've found the next best thing, it's not like one of those where, okay, go ahead, run. And maybe that's like that, because I also think that might be part of your role here.
Yeah, one of the things that uh, that plays into all of this is, even if the software is free, there's
Mm,
still costs involved. Um,
yeah.
you know,
Such as? What do you
Google,
mean? What do you
well,
mean? It said it was free.
Google for Education is free. We don't pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and we get a lot of value out of it.
Mm,
But
mm,
there's costs in terms of training. We have to train people, we have to manage it.
yeah.
The students and the teachers have to learn how to use it. if they're not familiar with it or familiar with a particular aspect of it. So that, time costs, and every minute you spend learning how to use a particular piece of software or hardware is a minute that you're not using it to learn whatever it is you wanted to learn in the first place.
Right, right.
So yeah, the we don't have a particular checklist. We don't have a set routine that we follow. It's a lot of conversation based, starting eventually getting to what is it that you need it to do?
Yeah.
Why do you care about this? What is it that you're trying to fix?
Mm.
And in some cases, it's not a question of that there's an immediate problem we're trying to fix. In some cases, it's, I was talking with a colleague at another school at a conference last month, and they were telling me about this, and it seemed really cool. So I want to
Mm.
play with it too.
Yeah.
So no matter how they get to it, eventually we start looking around. We're going to look at the tool they started with. If they came to me and said, I want this, well, okay, we'll take a look at that. But we're also going to look at other
Yeah.
similar
Alternatives or
products in the
yeah.
marketplace
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
see what's going on. I don't want to offend you too much, but
It's okay.
Digiexam wasn't the first
That's okay.
lockdown browser that we looked at. Um, but that whole process uh, came from a very specific problem.
Mm. Yeah.
And our English teachers wanted a solution.
Yeah.
They were very motivated to put in the time and effort to do some of the research as well. So we went through the whole scheme of what it is they wanted, how they imagined a solution working, and then we kept looking. But it's really the same thing, whether it's a lockdown browser or a video editing tool or a podcast editing tool,
Right.
or grammar checkers, or
Mm.
uh,
Mm.
the the next neat shiny hardware tool for the folks down in our film department.
Yeah. But I think that's really interesting in that, what you're describing here is that every conversation that you have, every decision that's being made is being discussed and thought about in an extremely thorough way. That there are multiple players expressing their opinions and ideas, trying to weigh the pros and cons for them along the way out of their individual, like out of their roles. So a teacher comes to you and they are trying to solve a problem in their classroom. You're looking at this from your perspective of like, is this actually feasible? Is it scalable? Are there other, and then of course together, then you're looking at like are there other tools that are doing the same thing? Are they doing it better? Are they doing it worse? I usually when I was working as a principal, I always thought of like the student conversations and the parent conversations that I was having as kind of the same thing that like you have to treat them as like this. There's not like a black and white or a right or a wrong path. There's no really the decision making process or the conversation is going to have to change and be dynamic all along the way. And I think that when looking at academic technologies, you also have to have that sort of same sort of dynamic and flexible um, think or like process decision making process there. Otherwise, it's going to end up being like we chose this one, and you just have to live with it. Like, or that someone said yes, and therefore, or someone said no, and therefore.
Yeah, it is very
It's
much it is a dynamic process, which is, I think, why we don't have a specific
yeah,
checklist of
yeah,
things to look at. Sometimes that might help us
mm,
not miss something that we should have thought about but didn't. But I think in a lot of cases, it's not going to speed things up because we've
right,
been through this enough that we know what the factors are. We know what we've got to look at and think about, and which one we do first, and in what order we look at this and this and this.
Mm.
Kind of depends on what we learn along the way,
Yeah.
while we're investigating some other aspect of it. But
Yeah.
the key thing is that as we're looking at it from all these different angles, is we got to be sure all the way through the process that we remember the why, that why are we doing this? Why is this a problem?
Yeah.
Why do we
Yeah.
care about this? Has to be uh, one of the factors that we consider all the way through.
Mm. Mm.
So we find something that we think is going to work. We
Mm.
start looking at it. We start researching it. We're going to talk with people at other schools if we can. If we can find someone else that has been through some of this,
Yeah.
we're going to
Yeah.
talk with them.
Yeah.
But all of the questions are not necessarily directly about the why, but
Mm.
that why is in the background all the
Yeah.
way through.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it's the red thread, all the way through this entire, like, think of it as like the story, right? The storyline. You have to have that there, otherwise you start, you end up with a product that you're like, what? Wait, what does this thing do, or why do we have it? And then you wonder at the end of the day, like, okay, do we need this anymore? Hopefully, but what you said there about using the resources that you have available to you, and particularly, I think, talking with other schools, other organizations, and their experience. I mean, that's I really like that in that there are people out there, and I think that's something that sometimes we forget, or at least I forgot. I don't know. I'm speaking out of my own personal experience now. I forgot that there are other people out there that you can reach out to and say, "Hey, I'm experiencing this problem, or I'm looking at this particular academic technology. Is it worth my time? Is it worth the investigation? I have this set up, or I have that set up," and see if anybody jumps on that. And I mean, I think that that's something to really, really take home, for sure. That there are people that are testing this. You hopefully are hopefully feel like you're unique, and that you're the first to the what do you call it? First to the finish line in terms of finding this next best thing. But hopefully there, like, remember that there are people out there, that are probably doing the same stuff. So I think, oh, that's really great. Yeah.
One thing that I spend most of my day, most of my week working on is our student information system and learning
Mm.
management system.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's provided by Blackbaud.
Yeah.
Um, and the community of Blackbaud uh, product managers in the school
Mm.
products arena is very strong and very active. We ask in that community, we ask a lot of questions about things very specific to Blackbaud, is how can you do this and how can you do that?
Mm.
But
Mm.
we also will throw out questions like, who's what lockdown browser are you using, and
Yeah.
what works
Yeah.
well and what doesn't? What about this? Ancillary products that aren't really Blackbaud but tie
Mm.
into Blackbaud in some way, or uh, are school related tools in one way or another.
Mm.
Someone else has looked at this before we did in almost every case. Someone's got something to say.
Mm.
And in some cases, it's, hey, this is a really good product. You should take a look at it. And in some cases, this was good, but it isn't anymore. And in some cases, yeah, this didn't do it for us, and here's why, but maybe it works for you. So it's the community isn't going to solve our problem for us, but it's going to give me a lot of additional information about where else I should be looking
Yeah.
besides what I'm already thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
It's
And
it,
I think,
it's very
yeah.
it's very much like uh, walking the exhibit floor at a convention.
Yeah.
You've got vendors all over the place with all kinds of different things, and some of them are going to be just exactly what you need, even if you didn't know you needed it. And
Mm,
some of them are going to be completely irrelevant, even if they've got a really nice, flashy booth.
yeah. Yeah.
And so the discussion forums are really kind of the same thing. Some of it is really good information for the people who care about it, but I don't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
on the other hand, there are questions that either someone else asks or I ask, and I get answers back from people who've already dealt with it, uh, and can really narrow the broad scope of the question down pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking um that's really what you want. You want to have someone that's like, I've gone like, and I mean, I think it's also confirmation of like that this is um, a challenging problem that I'm looking for, or I'm trying to figure out. If you're out there on the forums looking for things, and you want to have that confirmation that there are other individuals that either have the same issue, and I think that's one aspect of those forums, but then also to have that confirmation that yeah, there are other human beings that have solved this. So yeah, we can totally do this. Like I mean, in a lot of ways, I love I love the fact that we have AI right now. It's so much fun. Um, but in a lot of aspects, I don't get the maybe I'm just a really bad prompt crafter. But I don't get the answer or the result that I'm always looking for, and it's a little bit frustrating because I know that like this bot has like scraped somewhere and tried to compile something together, and it's not at all the answer that I'm looking for. But yeah, so forums, that's great.
And I am a part of several different discussion groups
Yeah.
in different contexts centered around different products. But the one that I'm most active in is the Blackbaud
Yeah.
environment, uh, just because over time I've found that's where I get the best answers.
But the thing I was thinking about with these forums in particular, and in particular learning management systems or information systems, is that uh, they act. I mean, I think, and maybe oh, you can chime in here as well. They act as almost like as the main body for a school system. I'm thinking that they're sort of like the digital ecosystem that all the other like other applications sort of latch onto, or and that's how it's been for I don't know. Maybe I'm totally off, um, but I think that that's the interesting thing, that these larger forums, like you're saying Blackbaud, or if we're thinking Canvas or whatever, they're going to be able to provide more information about how tools may be necessarily play nice within their environment. Uh, I, I guess where I'm going is if you feel that that's the same way, is it that like learning management systems have been, and now we're on a tangent here, or at least I'm on a
Well,
tangent.
well, I think just by their very nature, the
Mm,
school information system, the
mm,
who's enrolled, what years were they enrolled, who are their parents, what are their addresses, what are
mm,
their phone numbers, all of that information is going to be central to a lot of what we do. And it's the repository that has most of the information that any other system is going to want access to. And so, one chunk of my job is to make sure that other products are communicating back and forth with Blackbaud
mm.
correctly.
Yeah.
So our admission office uses a specific tool to manage the entire process, from first inquiry that of a family that, hey, maybe I'm interested, I want to think about this, can I get some information, all the way through the application process, managing the interview process, the decision process, the review,
Mm.
by others at the school on a student's file, looking at the recommendations that were submitted by other teachers from their previous school, all of that process leading up to, okay, this kid's coming to our school next year.
Right.
And so at that point, the tool that the admission office uses pushes data over into Blackbaud, into the school information system that I
That's
manage,
yeah, that's really interesting.
all electronically. I then go spend a lot of time massaging that data, getting it into the right form, filling in the pieces that we didn't get in the first pass, making all of the connections we need to make. But then that data goes from the school information system over to the medical records software that our health center uses.
Right.
That happens automatically overnight.
Yeah.
For new students who are actually enrolled, so in August, when our new school year starts, our bookstore software just notices, hey, we've got a whole bunch of new students, and puts them in the system so that they can buy things at the bookstore.
Right. Right.
And the same at the library circulation desk,
Yeah.
and two or three other systems that either the other system has a connection into Blackbaud, or sometimes I write some code to make a connection and do
Right.
some cross-checking to make sure that all of the accounts that should be there are there, and all the ones that shouldn't be there are not. But the student information system really is the core
Yeah.
product for us. The LMS, the learning management system, is actually, in my mind, is just another product that
Sort of.
consumes from the student information system,
Mm.
because it's got, certainly a lot of relevant information in the student information system that tells us who our teachers are, who our students are, what class is this student in, which section of that class is this student in, who's teaching that section, what room do they meet in. All of that stuff is student information system stuff, but the
Mm.
LMS needs it to put up a page so the students know what tomorrow's homework is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. And I mean, what we're talking about right now is really, really how you define a solid infrastructure, between the different systems that you have, or the different types of tools that you're using within your organization. And for you, I mean, like what you're describing here is really the relevance of the student information system as sort of the source of truth that is going to take, a prospective student, someone applying, like you said, and take them all the way from that point through, the application process, being a student, and then eventually, going through graduating and leaving the organization. So this like whole life cycle is really governed by and administrated by the information system that exists there, and then everything else, all those things just sort of trickle down, and I always think of it as like this like almost like an amoeba, just kind of like that the SIS has like engulfed these things. Maybe an amoeba is a bad thing, a bad analogy, because they eat all the other stuff that they get, right? They, I'm thinking that they absorb them and take them in, and it becomes part of them, that these other systems now have like access to. I used to teach biology, so it's like this whole cell kind of picture.
Well, it in my mind, I think perhaps an octopus might be
Yeah,
the better
that's a
image,
better.
just
Yeah,
because there are so many branches out of that central uh, core element of the SIS. But some of those branches out are sending information out, others are taking information in.
yeah,
Some are doing both at the same time. Um, the admission software that we use has a daily sync with Blackbaud for everyone who's made it over into Blackbaud because they're going to be a student, or they're the parent of someone who's going to be a student. But if they update their email address or their phone number in the admission process, we're going to get that information automatically overnight.
Yeah.
And then once we get it overnight, the next night, it's going to pop up over in the medical records software.
Right. Right. And they'll
Because
be
those are,
populated into the LMS, and they'll be populated into the library service. And it's like, it just is, oh, I mean,
it's not a one pass process. It's a
no.
continual
Yeah.
updating and feedback in all the different directions. So you mentioned the word infrastructure, and
Mm.
most people will think of infrastructure as being the hardware,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
certainly important. You know, if we don't have an electrical system working, none of this happens.
Yeah.
If we don't have a good solid network on campus, none of this happens.
Mm.
But the data flow is, you know, going back to something we were talking about earlier, the data flow is the why
Yeah.
for the network. You know, if we didn't care about getting data moved around, we wouldn't need Wi-Fi on campus.
Right. Right. Yeah. All those
Uh,
access points would be
but
totally, totally ridiculous.
but that's the stuff we care about. So we need the wiring,
Mm.
we need the fiber optic cables, uh, we need all of the equipment in the closet in each building to work, but we also need the databases to work, and we need those databases to talk to each other. And we need that so that everyone at the school can pull the information that they need to do whatever it is they want to do.
Right. And I mean, I'm just thinking like in terms of, because you talked about the size of your organization. Like, so how many individuals are involved in that kind of like that kind of handling this process? Is it you? Do you have a team?
Well, it's a kind of a hard number to nail
Pinned down?
down just
Yeah.
because there are lots of different people who
Mhm.
have a slice of it.
Yeah.
So within the technology office, we have the technology director.
Hmm.
We have another person who handles most of the hardware and the server room stuff. We have a third person who does the works with the teachers a lot on here's a solution to what you're looking for. Let's figure out the ed tech related stuff.
Hmm.
Two of those three people also teach classes. Um, so they're with students
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
By definition, that's part of their job. So they're around students a lot. And my job is more the data management and account management side, and working with teachers on some of the other ed tech related
Yeah.
tools that they're looking for. Uh, and
Right.
then there's the person in the admission office who I work with to get that data
Yeah.
flowing in their process. I'm talking with the bookstore folks. I'm talking with the health center folks. I'm talking with the librarians,
Mm.
all because each of them have their data requirements.
Right.
They want their thing to work. And sometimes that requires them to do something from their end. And sometimes it requires me to do stuff from my end.
Mm.
So you know, it'd be tough
That's
to say, here's how
hard.
many people we
Yeah.
have
Yeah. Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people are doing it as
Mm.
a slice of the rest of their job.
Yeah. But I'm also thinking that since it is this slice of the rest of their role or their job, it gives them a much better perspective in terms of like you were talking about the importance, the why of the data flow. Like I get like if I was the librarian or with the library group, I understand that if that data does not come in the right way, I will not be able to do the things that I'm supposed to do. So that perspective, because I can think that like in, and maybe this is because I'm sitting on the other side of things now, in a tech company, in that, you know, when you start to distribute labor, sometimes there's a compartmentalization that makes it very difficult to understand other people's roles and like the importance of why that person is doing what they're doing. In that, okay, I'm going to sit and you know, if I'm on the developer side of things, I'm going to sit and code, and I know that I have to produce this particular result at the end of the day, but maybe I don't have that like larger connection to the rest of the product. Whereas if I'm sitting on, you know, the sales side, I might not have the understanding of like why the emphasis on this particular part of the code is relevant, because, but we all, you know, we're all working towards something. And here, what you're describing is that, you know, in your organization, the fact that these individuals have these daily connections to students, to you know, to each other, and then of course to the tasks that they're supposed to be doing, they have a much better perspective in terms of, and also, what's the right word? Like a responsibility for the data that they're actually using. Um, I don't know. It just sounds like, it sounds like, man, this is, you've thought this out really well. At least it sounds like it's a well-oiled machine is really what I'm trying to, a
Yeah,
well-oiled octopus, right?
yeah, it evolves over time,
Yeah.
uh, because uh, over time the needs change, the tools available change, and the people involved also change. You know, different people come into a position with different perspectives on things. So it's, you know, sometimes someone coming in new to the school from someplace else has background with the way some other school had been doing it
Mm,
that really works better for us than what we've been doing on our for several years.
mm,
So we make some adjustments. In other cases, what they were doing at another school worked perfectly fine at another school, but doesn't really work for us. A lot of times it's there's something in between there. But you know, when we change a big piece of the environment of the infrastructure, then lots of other things wind up having to change as well. So
yeah.
obviously, when we switched from our previous student information system to the one we're in now, there were changes all over the place.
Mm, mm.
Lots and lots and lots of things had to happen. And we did that in the middle of the pandemic, which, in
Oh,
case you were wondering, is not the best
yeah, yeah.
approach. It's
Wait.
not considered best practice to switch to a new SIS and LMS when no one can be in the office.
Mm, mm.
Um,
Well, that
makes it a
meant
little tough.
you just wanted an extra challenge. That's all.
Yeah, that'd be one word for it. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, because and I think it's interesting in what you're talking about is here as well. It's sort of has to do with change management. You know, how do you, so how did you get everybody on board? How did it play out? I'm just very curious about this. You know, maybe this is a, maybe you don't want to talk about this example, but I'm just thinking
Uh,
change management
I,
in general is tricky.
yeah, change management is always tricky. No matter the scope of the change, whether it's just this one little thing that we're doing different this year compared to last year, or we're switching from this LMS to another LMS,
Mm,
or
mm,
uh, you know, any piece of it is tricky. But we've done it enough times that we know the general personality of the faculty collectively.
mm,
We
mm,
know what kinds of things we're going to need to be able to do, and we know that,
mm.
you know, there's a group of faculty members who all we need to do is point them in the right direction and they'll be off on their own.
Yeah.
Others will need some hand holding. Others will have to be dragged kicking and screaming into whatever it is we need them to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. That's like
And
every organization I've ever worked in.
well, oh, sure, absolutely.
Uh,
But the other piece of it is, of course, that all these people who need to deal with this change also have a whole other job that they have to do every day with students,
yeah.
uh, that has little, if anything, to do with whatever technology change we're foisting on them.
Right. Right. And then I think this is like we're almost coming full circle in terms of what you were talking about at the beginning of this episode where you had said, that there are these costs, even if this platform might be much better, even if the change is going to be much better, there's going to be this like training moment, there's going to be the hand holding moment, there's going to be the listening to the kicking or enduring the kicking and listening to the screaming, um, which which is I mean it's always something that I think like educational leaders, school leaders, they're thinking about. But at the end of the day, it maybe doesn't necessarily show up in the budget in that sense in the same way. But I'm also like um, when you were talking about or while we're talking about change management, I'm also thinking like in terms of these databases and the sort of the underlying structure that exists. How does that look when you transition from one platform or one type of product to another? Like how much is it a huge thing for like you who's working maybe more so like behind the scenes? How does that process look? Now I'm like very, I'm down the rabbit hole now. Uh, so
For for me individually and for the other people I was working with closely on the transition from the old uh, information system into our new one, we spent an awful lot of time talking about school processes that weren't really directly related to the databases, but were affected by them, or conversely would affect the
yeah,
database.
yeah,
So, for example, uh, we spent way more time than I thought we would have had to talking about report cards and transcripts,
hmm yeah,
because the new software has a particular way of generating report cards and transcripts. And it made us go back and rethink a whole bunch of stuff about why is this particular bit of information on the transcript? Does it need to be there? Do we
yeah,
want it to be there? And how are we going to get the data? We know how it worked in the old system, but where is that data going to be in the new system? And how do we
yeah,
get it from where it is to be on the transcript? And what are the mechanics involved, but also what's the logic and the reasoning for it? Again, going back to the why.
right,
Some
right,
things obviously are pretty easy to answer. A transcript has a list of courses and final grades on it,
yeah,
so that's what shows up. But that also means that we made a decision to not put any interim grades. We don't put a fall term
right,
grade on a transcript. We put final grades on the transcript,
hmm
because that's what a
yeah,
transcript is. If you want a fall grade or a winter grade, well, that's a report card, and we've got those too. But getting to that point
mm, mm,
took took some discussion and some thought, and was influenced by how the transcript tool in the SIS works. And it's that circular feedback of, well, we can
yeah,
do this in the software, but do we want to do that? And we want to do it this way. And can the software do that? And just around and around until we settle on something that, uh,
yeah,
even if it's not perfect, it serves our purpose.
right, right. And it's interesting in that like what you're talking about here is also like that. I mean, at the root of it, I mean, and I think this happens more often than maybe we think that sometimes the technology, either the limitations or the possibilities of the technology, makes us have to rethink what our internal policies, our structures, and routines are, and either, keep them the way they are and scrap the technology, or just say we're not going to use that function, or use the technology and that function and modify the routines. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. When I
Oh,
was doing the first presentation to the entire faculty
mm,
about the new um, SIS and LMS,
mm,
we'd been talking about it for a year
mm,
ahead of time. We had people from every office on campus involved in looking at this and meeting with the vendors and looking at particular aspects that each of those groups cared about.
mm,
But eventually we had to do a presentation to the whole faculty that said, okay, look, here's what we chose. Here's why we chose it. Here's what it's going to do. Here's why you should care.
mm.
And in that presentation, one of the slides I put up was a photo of a really, really big old tree with a bicycle that had grown into the tree, or the tree had
Had
grown
grown.
around the
Yeah.
bicycle, and the bike was 6 feet off the ground because when it was a small tree, someone leaned a bicycle up against this small tree
Mm,
and it just grew for years that way.
mm,
And yeah, I put that slide in because for a long time, it wasn't really clear to me whether the school was the bicycle or the tree. The SIS, the database was one of them, and the school was the other. But did the database shape the school's actions, or did the school's actions shape the database? And of course, the answer is yes, both. Um,
yeah. Yeah.
and I'm to this day, I'm not really sure which piece I would label how in that photo.
Uh,
I'm leaning toward it that the school is the tree, and that we shape our processes around what we can do in the database to some degree. And mechanically, that's certainly true. How we record attendance is the way the database allows us to record attendance. But it certainly, the SIS doesn't drive what happens in the classroom,
no,
how
no.
a teacher teaches a particular thing. It
Mm,
may influence how the teacher delivers some of the material, the support material, but it's not going to influence um, to a large degree what's going on in a classroom on any given day.
no, exactly. Exactly. I think that's, I think you're, yeah, that mental image that I have now of a tree and a bicycle, and the bicycle just being slowly like lifted off the ground. I think that's perfect in that sense. And like you said, that yeah, that the actions, the events, the learning that's going on, the learning moments and experiences that are happening in a classroom are not, they're not tied to the technology. We were doing these things way before, you know, way before learning management systems, exam platforms, SISs existed. That was happening, uh, and now it's just sort of like these are things that you can add on. It's not going to affect the learning itself.
Well, some of the
So
things in the
someone,
SIS won't
yeah,
affect the learning,
yeah.
but certainly other uh, tech tools
Mm,
very much affect the students' learning. Um,
mm, mm,
yeah, for for example, when I was in high school and college, word
mm.
processors didn't exist. There
No.
was no such thing. Um, and what that meant was when I had to write a term paper, I write it out by hand,
Yeah.
but of course it had to be typed because the teacher wasn't going to read that
Yeah.
many term papers handwritten. So we had to handwrite them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then we typed them. But all of the editing had to be done on the handwritten version because you really could only afford the time investment to do the typing once,
Mm, mm,
because that, again, word processors didn't exist, which meant the footnotes had to be done manually.
mm, mm.
And they were footnotes at the bottom of the page. They were not endnotes. That's
Yeah,
cheating.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but if you decided on a second pass after reading your typed uh, copy that this paragraph is really out of place, well, okay, that meant you had to retype a couple of pages, but it also meant that some of the footnotes moved,
yeah.
and it might spill the footnote over to the third page. And it really became a question of, is the change that I'm thinking about making to make the content of this paper better worth the effort it's going to take to retype 5 or 6 pages of this thing?
Yeah, yeah. Huh,
And no one would think about that now with a word processor, even
no.
if it was footnotes. It's, cut, copy, paste, done.
Yeah,
Everything's that the
yeah.
word processor is going to do that work.
Mm, mm,
And the other thing that the other aspect of this, as I said earlier, we're a Google school.
right.
So uh, our students and teachers do a lot of their writing in Google Docs.
Mm,
And the sharing aspect of Google Docs is a huge benefit to the educational process, because
right.
it allows the teacher to go in and look at the student's work well before they hand it in. The
Mm,
teacher can go in and look at it and add a comment to question, this isn't clear. What does this mean?
mm, mm. Yeah,
Or you maybe want to check a source on that type stuff. And the student can read the teacher's comments and make adjustments long before the final product is submitted for
mm,
a grade. And it's a lot of review and revise and review and revise and review and revise
mm,
individually by the student, but also, teacher review, student revise, teacher review, student revise, and around and around and around. Um, so you wind
mm,
up with a much, much, much better product because the process is so much easier.
mm.
So
Yeah, I mean,
our English teachers will talk a lot about the differences between process writing and product writing.
yes.
And if the process is easier, the product gets better.
Yeah,
And that's true for writing an essay in English or history, but it's
yeah.
also true if you're doing something in a science lab and collecting data electronically rather than manually,
Mm-hmm.
and redoing the chart and looking at, well, okay, now that I've done this chart with all of the data that was collected electronically, what's that spike there in the middle doing?
Yeah,
Where did
yeah,
that come from?
yeah.
It Does
You can
that mean
refine.
anything, or does that mean that somebody bumped the device
Yeah,
on the lab bench?
yeah. John
Who
dropped his bubble gum in there again.
you know who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Oh,
the data is there, and
oh,
it gives them more realistic look at the process rather than the idealized version of the data collection
yeah.
that they would have gotten 20 and 30 and 40 years ago by doing it by hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is like it becomes more of a formative process based on the efficiency of the technology that you have at your disposal. So like you said, with the process writing, with refining the actual with working with revisions, you're gaining access to, okay, from a teacher, from my teacher, I've just received this feedback. I can modify this now before submitting a final result. Um, I'm learning in that moment. The teacher is also learning in that moment how much I can, and also seeing like if where my limitations are, what strengths and weaknesses I have, and they're able to guide me. So yeah, the educational setting becomes much richer in that process, um, as opposed to, okay, here's the final, like you said. I grew up kind of in the same setup. I remember writing all of my papers and typing them on a typewriter. because my teacher was, they wanted me to do that. And it was like, okay, I don't want to work with writing because it's going to take a long time. It's going to be a lot of like small revisions, and then I'm going to end up producing a product that, I might not be satisfied with anyway at the end, because it hasn't been, I haven't gotten the information that I needed in order to make this as good as I want it to be. So I just remember like a lot of papers, just handing them in and being like, yep, oh well, I know that there's probably some errors here or some stuff that doesn't make sense. But yeah, like this is a great point. I think this is a perfect point in the sense like why we have academic technologies and why it's important to follow their development and make sure that, like you said, choosing the right one, and selecting that process needs to be well thought out, explored. Oh,
Yeah. And
cool. Yeah, go.
and
Go ahead.
that takes an awful lot of time
Yeah,
over by a lot of people over a lot of years to
yeah,
develop individual each individual's skill set for how to use the tools effectively and learning what tools are there within
yeah,
the product that they didn't even know about.
yeah,
Some people are just amazed that we can go back and look at the history of the changes in a Google Doc,
yeah, yeah,
because they never knew it was there. But it turns out to be a pretty useful thing if you've accidentally deleted the 3 best paragraphs you wrote.
yeah, yeah. Like, oh,
Well, okay, we can go get them.
yeah.
That's fine.
Maybe tied to that, and I know that time is flying, but like what makes an academic or like what makes a technology kind of sticky? Like how do you define like a good one versus a bad one? One that's going to like last long. I know that this is like it's a hard question, but at the same time it's an interesting question. Because there are some like you're talking about, there are some like tools that you're just like, I don't know how I lived without them before.
Yeah.
Um, but oh, and the others, I'm like, man, did I actually use that? Like, I don't know. I don't want to name any names now because I'll probably get in trouble. Like, but, no, but I mean, I'm thinking like, is there like what defines a good versus a bad, academic technology? I guess we can refine it to that. Let's start there.
Well, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, a good technology, whether it's hardware or software, a good technology solves the why.
Yeah,
It does what you need it to do. And the bad technology either doesn't do what you need it to do, or uh, is very, very, very hard to use and would take way too much time away from learning the stuff you're in class to learn
mm,
instead of learning how to use the tool, or it's just way too expensive and we can't afford it.
right.
It might, I mean, there are fabulous, absolutely wonderful video editing tools that we
Mm,
don't use because they're intended for
and
professionals
yeah, yeah,
and they cost a lot of money and they require hardware to run on that costs a lot of money.
yeah.
And we don't need that level of sophistication.
No,
So we found tools that do what we need at a reasonable price and runs on hardware that we can afford and
mm,
doesn't
mm,
take way too long to learn how to use and be productive. Now, we have film editing classes, and part of the purpose of those classes is to learn how to use those tools, but it's really to learn the process in the context of using that particular editing tool and
yeah,
that particular camera and that particular sound system
right.
and those particular lights uh, to set up your shots.
Huh.
So the hardware is just to make the software run,
Yeah,
and all of it together is just to be able to do what you need it to do.
yeah, yeah.
So, what makes software sticky? First, the need has to stick around.
Mm, mm,
Uh, if if we had a need and we solved it with a particular combination of hardware and software, but then the need goes away,
yeah,
yeah, the software is going away.
yeah. So
but
it has to fill that niche. Like it has to really, really, and I mean not like not to the point where it's like bloating and it has to fit it pretty perfectly. It's like the puzzle pieces, right? You know, when you lay
yeah,
that puzzle piece.
well, and I'll agree with you up to a point,
Sure.
but that puzzle piece is always going to be the shape that that puzzle piece is because it
Mm.
was cut out of something.
Or you can lay the puzzles like I do, where you just clip off
Well,
that little extra and like, oh, now it works.
yeah, that's probably not the best approach for that,
Yeah.
but it is a good approach to evolving how you use a particular piece of software
Yeah.
to do work. So, Google Docs and Google Sheets have done mostly the same thing for a long time.
Yeah.
Their basic services haven't changed a bit.
Yeah.
They keep adding new features that make it easier to accomplish some little side piece of it,
Mm.
but the core product hasn't changed a bit. But how we use it sometimes does.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah,
before
fills maybe a
Google
different need
Yeah,
in that sense.
before Google Docs, there was Word, and before
Mm.
Word, there was Word Perfect. And before Word Perfect, there was Apple Writer,
Oh,
which
yeah,
might
yeah.
give you, and ClarisWorks, and a whole bunch of others. Those products, well, Word hasn't gone away, but
Mm.
we don't see a lot of ClarisWorks on the shelf at Best Buy anymore.
No, no, no.
Uh,
Wonder.
and and there's a reason for that
Yeah.
because that product didn't keep up with the needs, the market needs, as
Mm.
quickly
Mm.
as some other products did.
Mm.
And there were better funded products that evolved quicker. And I still have Microsoft Office installed on my computers because every once in a while I need to be able to do something in Word or Excel. But the thing I use Excel for most is opening a CSV file
Yeah.
so that I can copy and paste it into
Into a Google
Google
Sheet.
Sheets. But I don't even need to do that
You,
anymore because I can import the CSV straight into Sheets.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
You said it, not me. That's the only reason why I've got Microsoft Excel anywhere.
yeah, but
It's
there are other people on campus
mm,
who
mm,
either because they don't want to make the move or
mm,
because they're working with some other software that make Excel an essential piece of their daily work,
right.
they live in Excel.
Yeah, yeah,
I
of course.
don't, but they do because, for example, the folks in our business office have to use Excel when they need to do data transfers to a
Yeah,
bank because that's the way it works.
yep. That's all financial, all accounting software
Um,
is. Yeah.
so I, the the sticky technology, again, software or hardware, is there still around because it still feels the need
Mm,
that we
mm,
started with, or because it still fills some other need that we didn't realize we needed when we started, but now have developed and we had this tool, so we're using it.
mm.
Um, Other stuff goes away when the need goes away, or when the need mutates enough that this thing that used to be a really good fit no longer is.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah.
ClarisWorks and WordPerfect are two examples only because things changed faster than they did and other stuff became more popular and more people were using Word than WordPerfect. And eventually you got to settle on something if you want to be able to work with anyone else.
Mm,
If you're on your own, it doesn't matter what you use, but if you're going to work with anyone else on anything else, you've got to have something that is compatible that both of you can use. And whether that's Microsoft Word on your desktop or Office 365 in the
yeah.
cloud or Google Cloud products, they stick around because they're still useful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's always interesting to like think about this particular question. I just think about, I mean, I try to reflect on like why I chose as a teacher, why I chose certain academic technologies and brought them to, tech administrators and coordinators, or when I was working as principal, why I said yes to certain things versus no to others. Um, and I think that, yeah, I mean, I think it's always out of it was always out of that like I see that there is that problem. I see that there is like there is a reason why this is needed, and that we have to do this. Otherwise, it's going to affect how efficient and effective my staff is, how satisfied the students are, and how well they can work in their on their particular projects, or to also make the organization more efficient as a whole. I'm thinking administratively, like you said, if we choose an SIS that's gonna solve a lot of problems, great. Like this is what I've been waiting for. Um, so yeah, it's always fun to ask that question.
On the software side,
Mm,
there's all of that.
mm,
There's the, does it solve the problem? Can we
mm.
afford it? Is it going to work? Can we get people to use it
Yeah.
without a horrible amount of effort? Uh, can we do it without a rebellion?
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
will they keep the pitchforks and torches in the closet? Um,
Is it like
yeah,
that?
well,
Sometimes.
sometimes
Yeah.
it depends on how bad a mistake we made in judging
Yeah.
what would
Yeah.
sell.
Mm, mm.
Uh, but the hardware environment changes a lot
Yeah.
too. And one of the things that has changed immensely over time, of course, is the cost of any particular hardware.
Yeah.
And the balance between how much does it cost and what it can do has shifted enormously over time.
Yeah.
Uh, when I first started working at the school at St. Stephen's, uh, we didn't have projectors in classrooms. We had a couple of
Mm,
AV carts with
mm.
a computer on the second shelf and a portable projector on the top, portable in quotes because it
Yeah.
was the size of a doghouse
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
weighed
Yeah.
a
It was.
ton.
Yeah.
But it got wheeled from room to room, and teachers had to plan in advance and sign up for it. And if someone else beat them to it, they couldn't use it that day. So they had to change their classroom lesson
Yeah.
plans based around when this projector cart was available. But eventually, the price of projectors came down enough that
Mm,
we could put projectors in a lot of classrooms. And eventually, we put them in every classroom.
mm.
And so we spent a lot of time in the summers uh, nailing projectors to ceilings and running cables down the walls and through
Yeah.
the walls and
Yeah.
such.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the next version of projectors came along that worked better because we could mount them to the wall in front of the screen, and we didn't have to deal with having a projector
All
hanging
the.
in the ceiling in the middle of the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then even those got to be problematic because we could only connect them to one
Mm.
device,
Yep.
but we needed them to be able to connect to the computer in the classroom and the laptops that teachers had and the laptops that
Right.
students had and the Android and iPhones that they carried in their pockets. So the connectivity became the key feature of and the key deciding point about which projectors we were going to put into our rooms.
Mm, mm. That's
And
really interesting. Oh, go ahead. Keep
and
going. Um,
we took old projectors out because they no longer served our need, not because anything happened to the projector, it's just that our need changed.
yeah.
Uh, when we shifted from our previous model to every teacher has their own laptop, and then a couple years later, every student has their own laptop, that shifted the connectivity requirements considerably. So we spent a lot of time in the hardware infrastructure for Wi-Fi connectivity all over campus, but also with making it so all of these devices that we now require kids to have could actually be used on the projector.
Hmm.
But it has to be used on the projector in the room they're in, not
Yes.
on the
Yeah.
projector in the room next door
Surprise. Yeah. Otherwise.
in the middle of somebody else's presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that our kids would do that, but
No, no.
it
But
came up in a discussion once in a while.
yeah, of course. Of course.
So it's the stickiness
Hmm.
of the technology, hardware or software, is how well can it adapt to our changing needs. And
Yeah.
it's going to be sticky as long as it keeps adapting to our needs.
Yeah.
And going back to that, what I was talking about earlier, the tree and the bicycle, sometimes we adapt our needs to the hardware, and sometimes we have to pull the plug and say, okay, it's time for new hardware or new software.
Yeah.
And that's really how long do we allow the software or the hardware to drive what we do versus making what we need to do drive the hardware and software.
Right.
And that gets into a whole different set of questions. Not the adoption process that we were talking about earlier
Mm.
is one
Mm.
thing, but the replacement process
Right.
is a whole nother critter, because not only do you have to make sure that whatever new thing you want to get has to do what you need it to do, same as before, but it also now has to work with whatever you were doing before, because
Yeah.
you can't take away one essential function to provide another essential function. You've got to maintain the essential stuff from the old thing
Right.
when you move to a new thing.
Right.
Part of the problem, of course, in that discussion is figuring out what's essential and what's not, and how much of
Sure.
the really nice but not essential are you willing to give up to get something new that is essential,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how long will it take to do that transition from the old to the new. When we want to replace projectors because we've got a new model that does things a lot better, well, okay, we can do some of them, but it takes a long time to do 50
Yeah.
or 60
Yeah.
classrooms. And
Exactly.
it takes a lot of budget to do 50 or 60
Right.
classrooms.
Right.
So all of that stuff factors into the decision. And sometimes the decision of what the new thing is going to be comes down to which one of these two or three options that are really good play best with the old thing that we had, that we've got to keep around in some places because we can't switch it out all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it as like it's almost like uh stacking Legos, like, building something out of Legos, right? If you can remove that piece out and it doesn't like make the whole entire thing fall apart, you've basically done a good job. If you can stack something on top of it, right? It's filling that need or filling a new need and enabling you to build higher or build bigger or whatever you're creating. So I think it's great that you took up the maintaining and I guess you could think of it as like pruning of technologies within an organization, because it is that it boils down to, if I remove this, is this going to dramatically change something else? How is this going to affect the infrastructure in all respects? Is it going to destroy something, or is it going to make it better? And then, you know, trying to think about that in advance is, ugh, that's a that's a fun one. Oh
Well,
goodness.
in the environmental science classes,
Mm,
uh, you know, they talk a lot about how a change here affects everything else over there. Everything's related to everything else.
mm,
And
mm,
in the technology infrastructure or the technology environment of the school is very much the same.
mm.
Um, if we make a change here, it's going to shift how something else works one way or another. Sometimes we know what those things are, and sometimes we don't find out about it until it's too late and we have to deal with it anyway.
Yeah. Oh, so much fun. Uh, Brian, this is great. We have like 10 minutes left, I think, right? But I wanted to I think I wanted to make sure that we round off and kind of see if we have any unanswered questions first, or things that maybe you thought about along the way that you're like, we should really talk about this or come back to this. Um, so maybe we can take a second and just, are there things that you were thinking about that you're like, we should really talk about that?
You know, to me, the key thing is that educational technology isn't magic, and it's not the goal. It's just a tool. We use it just like we use a textbook. Some days you need that textbook, and some days you really don't. Some days you need a particular piece of technology, and some days you don't.
Mm,
Some days the teacher is going to use that projector in the classroom the entire class period, and other days it's just going to hang there.
yeah.
Um, I I remember hearing about another school 25 years ago who was a pretty early adopter of every student has a laptop.
Mm. Okay, so they went one to one.
They were one to one very early in the game.
Yeah.
Um, but 25 years ago, laptops were a lot more expensive than they were today, and they're a lot heavier than they are today.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the the school decided that because we're going to require our families to buy a laptop for every student, they've got to use them.
Mm,
So every teacher was required to do something in class every day with the laptop
mm.
with every student, whether it made any sense or not.
Oh, I
They,
can I can imagine that
the,
might have some interesting effects.
the, the teachers' lesson plans had to specifically call out how they were going to have students using laptops that day in class every day.
Yeah.
Uh, we don't do that.
No, no.
Um, there are days where teachers will expect students to pull out their laptops and to work on
Yeah.
them for a good chunk of the period. There are other days where, yeah, it doesn't matter if you have your laptop here or not,
Mm,
because
mm.
that's not the focus today.
Right.
We use them as a tool, just like textbooks, just like pen and paper, just like the
Yeah.
whiteboard. Some days you need them, some days you don't. You use what you need when you need it because it serves the purpose that you need.
Yeah.
And it technology, ed tech is always going to be that way. Any technology is going to be that way. You rarely have technology just for the sake of having the technology. But we we want to be able to use it when we need it. We want to have the skills that we need to use it effectively. But if we don't need it that day, that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to be the thing that is the deciding factor on what you're doing. Like you described, it doesn't have to be the deciding factor of what you're doing in the classroom that day. It's like, oh, what's going to drive education forward? It's the pedagogy, probably not the technology, in that sense. Yeah. I think actually this is a great moment to just kind of wrap up here, and I really want to thank you, Brian, for taking time. to talk with me today uh, here on Digiexam Dialogues, Voices of Innovation. We're always we're always happy to pick expert brains. Let's put it this way. And and today we got to talk to you um, about technological infrastructures and making good choices in terms of technology and understanding that process and talking about how all of these things kind of hang together and the interesting aspects of database management. So I'm like really I'm excited to go through and listen to this afterwards, and that's probably what I'll do because I've got a train ride home. So yeah, but again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And if there are listeners out there that are interested in talking with us or asking questions, feel free to get in contact with us here. Um, and Brian, I won't extend your, but if you're listening to this and you want to get in contact with Brian, we probably can find a way. Um,
Absolutely. I'll be happy to make up answers to any questions someone can throw at me.
yeah, cool.
Um, you know,
That's so fun.
usually, like, just like those discussion forums we were talking about
Mm,
earlier,
mm,
I learned a good bit just from individual questions back and forth with someone,
yeah.
uh, because I'm learning about what they're seeing and how they're doing something and or at least what they're trying to do and why it matters to them. And that gives me something to think about for us as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what it's all about. I think about, the sharing of knowledge and experiences is really it's really important at this point. And especially when it comes to um like academic technology or technologies in schools and organizations, educational organizations, because there is a lot to take in and it's good that we have each other in that sense. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for hanging out, talking with me. It's been a blast. We've talked for like an hour and I think 35 minutes right now. So I'm gonna give this over to my head of marketing and let him have all the fun editing.
All right.
Um,
Well,
yeah, cool.
I've
So
enjoyed it. This was fun. I like it.
yeah, this was a blast. We'll have to do this again at some point and see. I think we've got some plans. Maybe we'll do some like panel debates or discussions or things like that.
Hmm.
Or maybe we'll get to hang out with you live in person. We're out there a bit more now in North America and particularly the United States. So could be fun to come and hang out on that beautiful campus in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Well, Texas has a big ed tech conference
Mm.
every year.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There we go. There we go. Oh, this is I feel like a plan is forming here. Perfect. Perfect. Uh, all right, cool. So thanks for the episode. Thank you, Brian. And oh, this is me signing off.
Thanks.